Hey, can I give you a tip to make you a savvier customer of the news media? Whenever there's a poll cited in the media, if you can, take 5 minutes to Google it and read the full details of the poll yourself. Let me give you an example of that. Last week, Greg Lyle's polling company called Innovative Research released a really interesting poll about the migrants from the Middle East who are pouring into Europe and want to come to Canada too. The poll was very widely cited in the media because of that story of that boy found dead on the beach in Turkey. That story was still in the news. Now, almost all the news media in Canada quoted this poll, and they quoted the question on page 15. Would you support or oppose increasing the number of Syrian refugees Canada is willing to accept? That's a pretty fair question, but it's still a little bit loaded because obviously most of the migrants flooding into Europe are not real refugees. They're not coming from war-torn areas where they are in a real danger. I mean, that little boy found on the beach had been living in Turkey for years where his dad was safe. His dad was actually a human trafficker who tried to smuggle his family and other families into Europe for cash. So sure, he was from Syria originally, but he had been living in Turkey for 3 years. He may have originally been a refugee, but he's been safe for 3 years now. So do you see how the question is still a little bit loaded? But 51% of Canadians said they do support increasing the number of Syrian refugees. Okay, that's probably true, although the poll didn't mention that just last month, Stephen Harper already announced he was going to do this, announced the increase in refugees, even before the news media discovered the subject. Anyway, so that's the headline you saw everywhere. Poll says Canadians want more Syrian refugees. Okay, but like I say, you can't trust the media. You got to read the rest of the poll yourself. Take a look here on page 7. What's your top priority as a Canadian? What's your number 2 priority? Economy, creating jobs. Those are 1 and 2 by far. Healthcare is in 3rd place, but look right there at the bottom. Only 2% of Canadians say the Syrian refugee matter is their top concern, and only another 2% said it was their second choice. Really? Only 2%? If you thought the media was reflective of reality, look at all these front pages. You'd say 98% of Canadians are clamoring for more Syrian refugees, saying it's their top priority. They were manic about it. I mean, Maclean's magazine even suggested that Canada take 200,000 refugees, just plunk them right in the middle of our country, just transplant entire cities from Syria right here. That's how crazy Maclean's is. Paul Wells called it a stark moral divide. And even though he himself wouldn't do anything to help the refugees, he insisted this was some sort of moral test for the country. Seriously, 2% of Canadians agree. The media party is literally a political fringe. Statistically speaking, they are extremists. Look, let's be candid. The media doesn't really care about Syrian refugees. The Syrian civil war has been raging for more than 2 years, 250,000 dead. The Islamic State literally catches young women and keeps them as rape slaves for their terrorist soldiers. The media's never cared. Since Barack Obama told them they didn't have to care, it wasn't worth fighting for, and he pulled all of his troops out of Iraq anyways. It was only when the Canadian media party saw this Syrian refugee issue as this month's political weapon to hit Stephen Harper, like last month it was the Mike Duffy trial, like the long-form census the month before, etc., etc. Only when they saw this as a partisan weapon did the media care. But do Canadians really look that stupid? Here. Last poll question that I want to talk about on page 10. This is a great question, and I give the pollster full marks for asking it. It's a bit long, but let me read the whole question to you. Ready? Some news story suggested that the family of the child who died trying to cross the Mediterranean had applied for refugee status in Canada, but was refused by the government. From what you have read, seen, or heard, do you think the story that the family of the child who died trying to cross the Mediterranean had applied for refugee status in Canada but was refused by the government is definitely true, probably false, definitely false, or do you have a firm view one way or the other? It's a long question. It was fair enough, even though it was a bit loaded. This question was asked of Canadians between September 4th and September 10th. Now, I should remind you that it wasn't until September the 10th and 11th that the bombshell news came out that Abdullah Kurdi, the dead boy's father, had been lying about his role. Other witnesses had come forward, including some who had been on the boat, and said he wasn't an innocent father. They said he was actually the human trafficker himself, the captain of the boat, that he had been speeding and steering uncarefully, that he didn't have life jackets for everyone, that he may even have been on drugs. In other words, he was the killer of his own family. and their families. That's what 3 separate witnesses said, reported by reputable news sources like Reuters and others. So keep in mind that that news, that bombshell, hadn't even come out yet when this question was asked to most Canadians: do you believe the media's stories? But look at the answer that came anyways. Only 8% of Canadians said that the initial reports painting the boy and his father as victims and Canada as the enemy, only 8% of Canadians said they thought that was definitely true. 24% said that was probably true. Compare that to 17%, it was definitely false. And another 17% who said it was probably false. Canadians think the media is lying to them. Seriously, only 8% of Canadians think the media has been definitely telling the truth on this. And I emphasize that was before Abdullah Kurdi, the boy's father, was revealed to have been a human trafficker who killed his own son through his own negligence. So now you know what this poll really said. Only 2% of Canadians say this refugee issue is their top priority. Only 8% say the media is definitely telling the truth. Can you see why those poll questions were omitted by the media coverage, but they hung their hopes on a vague statement that 51% of us want to do more? For TheRebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.